So today we begin our prosperity series for this year. It's one we've titled Being Prosperous No Matter What. We've aligned that with our annual theme of how to stay centered no matter what. And for several years now, we've included Unity's prosperity teachings in a 5 Sunday series that we spread out over the course of the year. We look at prosperity so that we can recognize the many different forms and the many different ways that we can call it into our life experiences. And we offer time after each of the Sunday lessons so that we can spend time, working with the principles, with the teachings that are offered. We take the time to more deeply understand them, begin to practice them, begin to integrate them into all the different aspects of our lives. And so today is installment number 1. And then the next 4 installments are currently scheduled for May, July, September, and November. This first lesson also celebrates the first of the Unity's teachings of the 12 powers, teachings that we are incorporating into our annual theme for this year. And these teachings were developed by our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, over a century ago now. And he saw a way in which we could focus not only on our God-given abilities, but also on our God-given potential. And he saw this potential as being accessed through the power of our minds and the power of our spiritual natures. And he developed his teachings around all of that, and he designated 12 distinct spiritual powers or attributes that he believed were always at the ready for us to tap into and use in our own individual, personal, spiritual development. Now, if you read his book, The 12 Powers, you'll find that he attributes each one of them to one of the 12 disciples. He also places each power as residing within a certain area of the physical body, and he offers his metaphysical interpretations around all of that and more. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that detail as we work with each of the powers, one each month as we go throughout 2021, but I will offer some highlights of Charles's teachings and encourage you to read his book and others if you wish to go deeper on your own. Now, I will note, and I say this for me, and I do know that I'm not alone because a lot of other people have told me the same thing, and that is that reading Charles Fillmore is not always the easiest thing to do. He was of a very, very scientific mind. He also wrote over 100 years ago. And so the culture, his foundation, the style of his writing, that's not even how he would speak today. So it's not always easy for some, myself included, to just grasp onto what he's trying to say. So there's another reference that I want to offer to you, and it was my savior in being able to more easily grasp and understand the teachings of Mr. Fillmore. And it's a book by author Winifred Wilkinson Hausman, and it's titled Your God-Given Potential, Unfolding the 12 Spiritual Powers. It is such an easier read, and at the same time, it truly honors all that Mr. Fillmore first presented decades and decades ago. All right, so with that, let's begin our prosperity and our 12 powers journey for this year. Now, when we shared in our opening prayer up for today's service just a bit earlier, I referenced the booklet that I had received when I first took a class on the 12 powers. And this is how imagination was defined in that booklet. It said, imagination is the ability to shape and form thoughts. It is the power which forms the formless. Imagination is the vibration before matter. Ideas are captured with the power of imagination, and imagination creates our physical world, our bodies, and our life. Imagination begins the process of outpicturing our desires into physical reality. Imagination waters the idea seeds from spirit. So the ability, the power to shape and form thoughts. That is pretty much the crux of our divine power of imagination. Now, in Mr. Fillmore's writings on this power, he placed it physically as residing right between our two eyes, often referred to as the third eye. It's one that enables us to see beyond that which our human eyes can see. Scripturally, he saw the disciple Bartholomew who was previously known as Nathaniel, as being this power's representative. The story is told that while Nathaniel was sitting under a tree one day praying and meditating, he was approached by the disciple Philip, inviting him to come join with Philip and then go and follow Jesus. But Nathaniel was very skeptical about doing that. He needed to meet this person, Jesus. He needed to see him. He needed to spend time with him. And it was during one of those times that Jesus just casually mentioned to Nathaniel that he had seen him one day sitting under a fig tree, appearing to be praying. And Nathaniel saw that as being proof that Jesus had this power of inner vision. And it convinced him that this man was someone special, that he was someone that he should join with and follow, which he did. And he then became known as Bartholomew. So let's look at our power of imagination today. Let's drill down a bit more beyond that more broad umbrella statement of it being the power to shape and form thoughts. Let's look at more of how and what our imagination can do and how it is that we are the ones that can step in and guide that process. So in doing so, we're going to break this down into two parts or two sections. And I'm calling the first one the development phase. And the second one I'm going to refer to as the spiritual application phase. Now, the first phase, that is where we learn what our imagination can do, and we learn what is ours to do in order to tap into it and put it into use. And then the second phase is when we experience that very special spiritual awakening to the attribute itself. So when we think about what our imagination can do, we can start with using the title of the chapter in Miss Hausman's book that she dedicated to imagination. And she titled that chapter, See It Right. See It Right. There's a saying in Unity, maybe you've heard of it, maybe not, but it says to set it right, see it right. She notes that if we want to change the conditions in our minds, the conditions in our bodies, the conditions in our affairs, then we need to transform the pictures we're holding in our mind of those things. So our imagination at its core, when we tap into it, it automatically begins to make space in us for possibility. And speaking to that from a spiritual perspective, it's the means through which we can conceive that divine idea of spirit, one that we do hold on to in our minds such that we begin to manifest it into our reality. Now, that can sometimes be a fairly big leap to make, but it doesn't have to be as big if we just pay attention to a few aspects of the imagination that we can do our part in working on developing. For example, the imagination acts as an interpreter of what our eyes actually see, right? So the goal is to have this feature work in ways that we train it so that we can more clearly, more consistently, more frequently see the good, the beauty, the wonder, the prosperity, the abundance that's all around us at any given moment, things that we might sometimes miss if we're only relying upon our human eyes. It takes us beyond what can sometimes be like a knee-jerk reaction or response or assumption or thought to a place where we can see beyond and below that more surface or superficial level. When I was writing that, I thought back to, I haven't watched it in a long time. I think it's still on TV, but years ago, I used to watch some of the telecasts of the program America's Got Talent, right? And a contestant, and many times it would be a singer. They would walk out on the stage and they would be judged immediately by their outer appearance, the appearance of their bodies, the appearance of their clothing, their hairstyles, their age. And you could hear through the mic some of the assumptions and even expectations being made about them, about what they were going to offer, how they were going to offer it, what it was going to sound like. And then they'd begin to sing in ways and with sounds and styles and movement that showcase this magnificent and very unexpected gift being offered. And you could see on the faces of the judges and all the audience people that were sitting behind the judges that all of a sudden they were all now seeing that person differently. All of a sudden they were interpreting them differently. So we want to try and do that from the start, to be able to see a person, for example, and go to a place where we can imagine the possibilities that exist within that person, or in an experience that we're having, or in our outer affairs. Imagine the possibilities and the good and the gifts that can come to us through them that would enhance and enrich our lives. Imagination also comes up with new pictures and possibilities. It works with what we see, and it starts to go to work to create all sorts of different combinations for us to consider. You think of someone who's an inventor. Think about how many images and cross images and possibilities they might think of in trying to invent something, or just the way that people and businesses have reinvented how they do business or just run their households during this time of the pandemic we've been moving through. Or think about someone who desires a new job because they just have zero passion for what they've been doing anymore. You put that out there, and then all the new combinations of talents and skills, of desired experiences, anticipated rewards, location, fulfillment, all that we can see as being that we desire begins to form in our minds as we call upon our imagination. And then one more, imagination is a communicator. It helps us describe to others what we see in our minds, the ideas we have that no one else can see. And so our imagination helps us to communicate that to others. So it's not really that hard to see how imagination really has a part in designing so many different facets of our lives. It's quite forward looking, always beginning with an idea that comes into our minds, and then working on that idea so that we can experience it and bring it into being in the future. So this is what we now want to work on in order to hone and develop these different ways that we can tap into and use our imagination. And the first thing we want to remember to do is just the word cleanse. We want to cleanse, and that is the cleansing of the screen in our minds, cleansing it so that there are no thoughts, no images, no nothing that conflict with what we want to experience, that conflict with the desires of our hearts, of what we want to have in our lives, who we want to be in our lives. I think right now, we've all been working on cleansing our minds of the images of the siege that took place in our capital a few weeks ago. As we then start working on imagining all that is possible within a democracy, all that is possible in this country as we move past that tragic day. Or sometimes it's simply thoughts from old stories from our past, might be thoughts that creep in that tell us to believe in limitation and lack, might be old resentments coming in, there may be fears present in us, things that stand in the way of our being able to clearly see, clearly focus on what is possible right now, what is possible today. And so we cleanse, we do our best to let those images go. And just like affirmative prayer, we release what doesn't work, but we got to fill that space right away. So we begin to fill our minds with those positive, powerful images of what you want to see expressed in your life. And then the second thing we want to do is to take time in a process that Ms. Hausman called consideration. And what that means is that the first step of cleansing isn't one to just rush on through. And it certainly is not one to force. So give yourself time to release. Give yourself time to consider what it is you do want in your life. Be deliberate about that. Allow all the different combinations to start to form. Doesn't mean you have to take them all in or accept all of them, but let them all show up so you take time to consider them and make your choices. And fill in as many details as you can. Put those details in there. Give them time of consideration. And I thought about this for myself, and maybe it would apply to you, but consider all the time that we may very easily give to things like worry or anxiety or stress and so forth. Give the same amount or more time to imagining all the good that is yours only because of a matter of divine birthright. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned how our imagination is often a very forward-thinking power. And that's true. That's true. This past week we had a board meeting on the calendar. So in those days leading up to the board meeting, I tapped into my imagination because there are all kinds of details that I had to pull together for certain things that we were going to be discussing as a board. There are various documents I needed to create, various details to have at the ready in case questions came to me from other board members, simply setting up a Zoom session, sending out the email. Forward thinking. Or how many of you have already begun imagining yourself sitting in the place that's going to be the first place you can go completely unfettered, unafraid, safely once we're able to travel in ways we can't do today? How many of you have been imagining yourself being in whatever place is going to be your first place to go? And another one that's been on my heart for a long time now is imagining that first hug that I will be able to give and receive from someone outside of my safety bubble. Now, in addition to this forward-looking aspect of our imagination is another aspect that basically puts it into reverse. Neville Goddard was a 20th century metaphysician who believed that our imagination also works after the fact. He insisted that we are able to revise our past. And this is how he saw that occurring. He wrote, "We don't discard the thing that is unpleasant, that experience we had moments ago, years ago. We revise it. Revising it, we repeal it. And as we repeal it, it projects itself on the screen of space, bearing witness to the power within us, which is our wonderful human imagination." So what he's saying there is that we take an unwanted memory and we replace it with one that is wanted. We keep focusing on that. We keep affirming that until we begin to feel, its positive impact in whatever way that begins to show up in our lives. Now, I'm not so sure that I can completely get on board with this one, but I still wanted to share it so that you can make up your own minds for yourselves. Now, it may be semantics, I'll give it that much, but I just don't think that we can. I don't think that we should revise our past. I mean, if you just look up the word itself, revise means to change. It means to alter. And I don't think that we can change or alter our past. I also don't think that if we don't address what is unpleasant or what was unpleasant, no amount of new beliefs and positive words of affirmation are ever going to be lasting in effect, because that unpleasant thing is just going to be very patient. And as soon as it has an opening, it's going to come right back up in our face to be addressed. And then thirdly, I always want to remain aware of either practicing personally or perhaps even worse than that, teaching what we call spiritual bypass. And spiritual bypass is when we just see something unpleasant and ignore it. We just avoid reality altogether and slap on a happy affirmation on top of it. That's spiritual bypass, and that's very dangerous. So I think this is somewhat similar to today, how we can hear some folks speaking of only wanting unity and moving past what happened in Washington, D.C. And then there are other voices who also want unity, but in conjunction with accounting for the horrific experience that the Washington, D.C. event was. So where I tend to fall in this, and I've offered this word before, is I tend to turn to reframing the past. And I believe that calls upon the very same power of imagination that we're talking about today. Because reframing something from our past is seeing it in new ways, and hopefully in positive ways and useful ways. Reframing helps us to see and find those gifts that the experience has indeed brought us, and helps us to let go of all the rest. So again, we're not changing the past, we're not repealing it or altering it or revising it, we're just changing how we view it. And Winifred Hausman wrote about something that I think is fairly similar to this. She called it discrimination. And she wrote that by mounting the step of discrimination, you learn to sort out immediately those ideas you want to accept and those you want to reject. She noted the importance of maintaining an inner balance and the right use of what she called this picturing power, which is our imagination. And I did this several years ago now as to how I approached chronic illness. I've shifted from a space of holding all sorts of negative thoughts in my mind and feelings in my heart about it to reframing it so that I was able to start seeing the gifts that I knew I had come to realize throughout the process, and then training my mind to look for, to watch for, to observe the good. The good was that was all around me, and was also the good that I was able to believe existed within me. And putting my energies behind those kinds of thoughts and those kinds of ideas not only significantly eased the impact illness was having on my physical body, but the good, the prosperity, the abundance in so many different forms just began coming into my life. A fabulous new job and commensurate salary to go along with it. A clarity of emotions and guidance regarding, my marriage, a deepening of relationships with my sons that has continued today. I found myself in a new church and receiving a new vocational call, and I felt the best physically I had in years. And I can honestly tell you that over the years, and this goes back to beginning in 2001, so 20 years now, it's become almost automatic for me to make this shift in my thoughts and my imagination under many other circumstances that have arisen in my life. And while I'm not there yet, I am using that tool right now as I'm working with how to live with and deal with this current monitoring of my heart that's taking place, and unanswered questions that abound, and such that I spoke about a couple of weeks ago. So to set it right, see it right. When we see it right, that's when we experience the second phase of this divine power of imagination. Because when we are setting something right in our lives because we're now seeing it right, then we're experiencing that personal spiritual awakening to the power itself. And Miss Hausman saw this awakening as having three phases. And so here's a prosperity gift for every single one of you today. You've already ventured into step one, or phase one, because it's the step of beholding. If you weren't with us last Sunday, I encourage you to check out the lesson on being a beholder. Go to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, our website. It's there for you. I had no idea last week that this was going to show up this week. So what a gift, right? Beholding. We talked about last week. It's seeing life, seeing the world through eyes of divine love. It's seeing all of it in the light of spiritual ideas and spiritual truth, and doing so no matter what the experience may be. From that awakening to our spiritual power of imagination, the next phase, the next step is discernment. And in our context today, discernment takes the form of clarity and illumination beyond anything we've ever known before. Anything we've ever known before. That's when we're receiving a divine idea of God. That's when we're seeing those divine ideas, those seeds that Spirit's planting come across that cleansed space and screen in our minds. And then the final step, Ms. Hausman calls that one vision. And it's not vision in the ordinary sense that's coming from our human eyes. It's the vision that Jesus called the single eye. Single in the sense that we now see with eyes of Spirit. Single in the sense that we no longer need to receive ideas or images as messages from God. Single, we no longer have to think about what we see, because at this place we are one with God and we see as it sees. Charles Fillmore, he had deep beliefs in prosperity, abundance for everyone, And he believed that we had the powers within us to bring it all into our realities. And as he wrote about this power of spiritual vision, that is the height of awakening to our imagination, he said this spiritual vision is seeing God as the foundation of all, the source of all, and the substance of all. He said it is seeing the good, the true, and the beautiful everywhere. When we see with this kind of vision, seeing God as our source, we are unlimited as to the prosperity that we can bring into our lives. We are unlimited in our capacity to set anything right in our lives and set anything right in our world. But we have to start, and we start by simply imagining the possibilities. God bless you.